They called it a relic before the scan finished. The Imperial observation chamber glowed with layered hololiths as the lone human battleship rotated in vacuum, its silhouette crude against the elegance of the Empire's forward armada. 10,000. Vessels held formation behind the Admiral's dais, a living proof of centuries without defeat, and the ship before them looked like a mistake preserved by inertia. Armor plates overlapped invisible seams. Kinetic apertures scarred the hull like industrial vents. There were no luminous veins, no energy bloom, no ceremonial symmetry. A junior tactician confirmed displacement mass at 14.2 million tons and was cut off by soft laughter that rippled across the chamber. This was not a warship by modern doctrine. This was an artifact that had somehow drifted into history's present. Sensor chiefs spoke in measured contempt. No active field lattice detected. No shield harmonics above background noise. Heat signatures suggested mechanical reactors rather than stellar taps. One admiral noted the spacing between armor layers and dismissed it as inefficient metallurgy, a failure to understand resonance mitigation. Another flagged the external weapon ports, counting 36 along the spinal axis, and categorized them as obsolete projectile systems. The fleet's combat AI assigned a threat rating of 0.03 relative to a standard Imperial cruiser. Processing. Estimates populated the display, compliance achieved in under 6 minutes, crew neutralized, hull recycled. Primitive, someone said, and the word settled like a verdict. They widened the scan cone to include the rest of the system and found only emptiness, no escorts, no pickets, no energy wakes. 67 faint transponder pings marked human vessels at extreme range, scattered across 2.4 million kilometers, none matching Imperial line doctrine. The admirals interpreted the dispersion as fear or incompetence. They did not consider it geometry. The Empire had seen this pattern before in lesser species, a solitary symbol ship, a ritual gesture before capitulation. Processing would be merciful, efficient, and final. Processable. Orders moved without urgency. The forward screen, filled with the battleship's internal mapping as deep penetration scans traced corridors, crew compartments, magazines. Life sign counts stabilized at 1842. The number was logged without comment. Slavery registries updated automatically, allocating labor quotas across 3 sectors. A compliance broadcast was prepared in 6 languages, its tone instructional and patient, explaining the benefits of orderly surrender. The admirals allowed themselves a moment of professional satisfaction. This encounter would be archived as a footnote, another data point in the Empire's long proof that resistance always ended the same way. A technician hesitated, then reported anomalous returns in the armor gaps, voids wider than expected, layered, cavities interrupting scan coherence. The anomaly was dismissed as poor construction tolerances. Another noted the battleship's power curve rising not in spikes, but in a flat, stubborn line, holding steady at levels too low for any known shield system. That too was dismissed. The Empire did not fear what it could not classify. It erased it. The admirals authorized a demonstration volley from 3 cruisers at 18,000 kilometers, energy output capped at 12% to avoid overkill. The order was recorded as routine. As the command propagated, one of the elder strategists watched the human ship a moment longer, unsettled by its stillness, by the way it neither fled nor signaled nor adjusted its attitude. It simply held vector, armor turned squarely toward the armada, as if mass alone were an argument. No ceremony, the strategist said quietly, and the chamber lights dimmed as weapons charged. Behind the laughter, the Empire prepared to teach, a lesson it believed it had already mastered. The reply arrived before the compliance broadcast finished queuing. Imperial channels opened across the command chamber, 6 bands collapsing into one as the human signal forced priority, with blunt authority rather than protocol. There was no anthem, no visual pageantry, no negotiation preamble. A single frame, resolved, a dark operations bridge, lit for function, not ceremony. A human officer stood centered, hands folded behind their back, posture relaxed to the point of insult. No visible rank adornment, no sign of fear. The Empire transmitted first, as custom demanded. The message was precise and exhaustive, citing imperial mandate, historical precedent, and the efficiencies of peaceful processing. It listed protections for compliant populations and penalties for delay. Time allowances appeared on the display: 180 seconds to acknowledge, 360 to disarm weapons, 600 to prepare for boarding. The admirals watched the humans' eyes track the data without interruption. No reaction registered. When the Imperial envoy concluded, silence stretched for 4 seconds. Then the human spoke. "We acknowledge receipt," the officer said, voice level unamplified, carried on a narrow-band transmission that ignored the Empire's harmonic standards. "Your assumptions are incorrect." A murmur passed through the chamber. The officer continued without raising volume or pace. "We are not petitioning for inclusion. We are not disputing your authority. We are informing you that it does not apply here." The words were translated, verified, and retranslated. No ambiguity remained. One admiral demanded clarification, citing the numerical disparity displayed plainly on every tactical map. 10,000 Imperial vessels to 67 human signatures, one of them already bracketed for destruction. The human officer inclined their head slightly, as if acknowledging a familiar argument. "Those numbers are accurate," they said. "Your conclusion is not." The Empire escalated to legal framing, invoking the classification of pre-warp civilizations and the corrective necessity of enforced compliance. The human response was immediate. "We crossed interstellar space under our own power 214 years ago," the officer said. "We are not pre-anything, and we do not kneel. Do not kneel." The phrase appeared unbidden on auxiliary displays as analysts flagged it for rhetorical anomaly. There was no defiance in the delivery, no theatrical emphasis. It was stated as exact, like mass or distance. The human officer went on, outlining boundaries in clipped sentences. No surrender, no tribute, no boarding. Any attempt to seize personnel would be treated as an act of war. Any act of war would be answered. An admiral laughed, sharp and dismissive, and authorized a countdown marker to appear in the human feed. The officer watched it tick down from 300 without comment. At 240 they spoke again. "This is your final opportunity to disengage," they said. "Withdraw beyond 1.2 million kilometers. Power down offensive systems. We will not pursue." "And if we refuse?" the admiral asked. "Then you will learn why our ships look the way they do." The countdown reached 180. Imperial doctrine required a final compliance prompt. It was transmitted automatically, stripped of nuance by machine efficiency. The human officer waited until the last word rendered, then closed their eyes briefly, as if concluding a routine briefing. "We do not kill prisoners," they said. "Plan accordingly." The channel cut. The human battleship did not move. Across the tactical display, 67 distant pings adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree, so small they barely registered. The admirals dismissed it as noise. Orders to fire were cued, clean, and confident. The Empire had been refused. The first shots were calibrated to teach, not to kill. 3 Imperial cruisers released coherent energy lances at 18,000 kilometers, power capped at 12%, spectra tuned to overload any known field lattice. The beams crossed the void in perfect alignment, painting the human battleship in white-blue glare. Sensors across the armada waited for the familiar cascade. Shield bloom, harmonic failure, hull breach. It did not come. The energy struck armor. Not shields. Armor. Light scattered across the battleship's surface and vanished into the seams the admirals had mocked minutes earlier. Thermal spikes registered, then flattened. Radiation bleed-through fell below background within 0.8 seconds. The ship's power curve did not flare or dip. It held steady, a flat line at levels the Empire's models insisted were insufficient. Damage assessment windows populated and froze at 0 confirmed penetrations. No effect. A second volley followed. This time from 6 ships, output raised to 28%, frequencies modulated in staggered bands to induce resonance. The beams overlapped, saturating the target's silhouette. Imperial gunners watched for the telltale ripple of failure. Instead, they saw the armor drink the fire. Cavities between plates refracted and bled energy laterally, dumping heat into void-facing radiators hidden deep within the hull. Ablative layers vaporized by design, carrying charge away in controlled plumes that sensors mistook for harmless debris. An analyst reported efficiency loss at 91.7% absorption. Another corrected it to 92.1 as more data arrived. The number stabilized and refused to move. The admirals leaned forward. Orders escalated without discussion. 12 cruisers fired at 45%. Then a synchronized pulse from a battleship-class emitter at 60, violating peacetime safety margins. The impact washed the human ship in light bright enough to cast shadows across Imperial hulls thousands of kilometers away. For 3.4 seconds, the battle space was nothing but glare. When it cleared, the human battleship was still there. Armor sections had blackened. External plates sloughed away in sheets, revealing identical layers beneath, intact and square to the eye. Threat. Internal temperatures peaked and dropped in controlled cycles. Crew life signs remained stable at 11842. No evasive burn, no counterfire. The ship absorbed, vented, endured. They're still there. A junior weapons officer whispered the line before catching themselves. The words were logged anyway, flagged as emotional leakage. Imperial doctrine did not account for a target that refused to react. Reaction was how victory was measured. Panic, maneuver, signal noise. The human ship offered none of it. At 72% output, the Empire's weapons began to hurt themselves. Emitters overheated. Containment fields wavered. One cruiser dropped out of formation to vent plasma, its captain filing a damage report that listed target non-compliance as the cause. The admirals ordered a pause to reconfigure firing solutions, irritation bleeding through their control. During the lull, long-range sensors caught movement. 67 human signatures adjusted again, this time by measurable margins. Vector. Changes of 0.6 degrees. Acceleration profiles rising in smooth ramps. Distances began to close from 2.4 million kilometers to 2.1. The Empire noted the change and dismissed it as a belated attempt to flee. The human battleship transmitted a single telemetry burst, unencrypted narrowband meant to be read. It showed impact graphs, absorption curves, and a simple line of text stamped with a time code. Efficiency acceptable, it read. The admirals ordered one final demonstration volley at 80% to end the farce. As weapons charged, an elder strategist stared at the absorption curve, at the way it flattened regardless of input, and felt the first cold touch of uncertainty. If this was acceptable, they wondered, what came next? Across the void, the human ship held vector and waited, its armor still steaming faintly, as if inviting the Empire to continue making the same mistake. They did not dodge when the next volley came. They advanced. The Imperial weapons fired at 80%, beams flaring with unstable brilliance as safeties protested. The human battleship took the strike squarely, armor shedding heat in controlled plumes. And then its drive curve changed. Not in a spike, in a slope. Acceleration rose smoothly, inexorably, as if mass itself had decided to move. Imperial sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the numbers. Sustained thrust climbing past 8G, then 10, then stabilizing at 12. 12G. At that acceleration, doctrine said crews liquefied and hulls failed. The Empire watched the human ship close distance from 18,000 kilometers to 15,000 in seconds, its vector precise, its profile unchanged. Life signs held steady. No internal alarms. The battleship did not weave or jink. It did not need to. It was not evading fire. It was shortening the equation. Then the rest of the human fleet moved. 67 signatures flared across the tactical display, each entering its own acceleration ramp, none matching the others. Vectors diverged and converged in patterns the Empire's formation models could not resolve in real time. Human ships slid through gaps that doctrine insisted were unsafe, passing within tens of kilometers of Imperial hulls without collision. their timing separated by fractions of a second. The dispersion the admirals had mocked revealed its purpose. This was not fear. It was pre-computed geometry. Imperial formations began to deform under the pressure of proximity. Command ships ordered minor corrections to maintain elegant arcs, but those corrections collided with one another as human vectors intersected the space they were meant to occupy. Fire control solutions lagged as targeting computers struggled to track acceleration profiles that did not peak or pulse but held steady, relentless. At 12G, the humans did not outrun the Empire's weapons, they outran its assumptions. Closing fast. Distance counters ticked down. 12,000 kilometers, 9,500, 7,200. Imperial captains reported firing windows collapsing as human ships crossed into camp. Ranges optimized for kinetic engagement, where energy coherence degraded and reaction times compressed below safe margins. One cruiser broke formation to create space and found a human destroyer already occupying the vector it needed, sliding past its bow at relative velocity high enough to strip sensor vanes clean off. The battlespace lost symmetry. What had been a layered wall of Imperial power became a crowded volume of intersecting threat envelopes. Human ships exploited it without haste, each movement forcing the Empire to choose between colliding with allies or surrendering positional advantage. The admirals issued contradictory orders in rapid succession, tighten ranks, spread out, hold, arcs, and watched as compliance with one command violated another. At 4,000 kilometers, the human battleship cut thrust and pivoted, bleeding velocity in a controlled burn that brought it broadside to 3 Imperial cruisers simultaneously. The maneuver should have torn the ship apart. It did not. Inertial dampening held. Crew vitals remained flat. The Empire's gunnery solutions updated too late. Their beams lancing through vacuum, the human ship no longer occupied. An elder strategist realized, too late, that the humans were not collapsing the formation with fire. They were doing it with timing. Every acceleration, every cutoff, every fractional degree change was forcing the Empire to react, and reaction was cumulative. Errors stacked, space shrank. At 3,000 kilometers, the human fleet settled into firing geometry. Weapons ports along the battleship's spine, irised open, dark and unapologetic. Across the display, Imperial command vessels found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could no longer escape without tearing their own fleet apart. The Haid admirals watched the numbers stabilize and understood that the engagement had crossed a line it could not uncross. The humans had closed the distance. Now the Empire would pay for every kilometer it had laughed away. The first kill was counted before it was seen. Fire control on the human battleship resolved solutions across 3 Imperial command vessels, now trapped inside 3,000 kilometers, their elegant hulls struggling to reorient without colliding with escorts. Human targeting did not hurry. It waited for convergence, vectors aligned, acceleration curves flattened, probabilities narrowed. Then the battleship's spinal railguns discharged. There was no flash, no warning glow, just mass at velocity. 6 tungsten penetrators left the rails at a measured fraction of light speed, timed 0.14 seconds apart to defeat point defense prediction. Imperial sensors registered impacts before commanders understood they had been fired. The first rod punched through a command cruiser's forward hull, ignored the superstructure, and exited through the engineering core. The second followed the same path with trivial deviation. Internal pressure collapsed, power died. The ship split cleanly along stress lines it had never been designed to endure. 1. Missiles followed, launched not in salvos, but in arithmetic. Human destroyers released them in groups of 7, staggered by milliseconds, each carrying distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot and obvious, drawing fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Imperial point defenses tracked the loud ones and congratulated themselves as intercept markers flashed green. The quiet missiles arrived untouched. At 2,400 kilometers, a second command vessel attempted a jump spin maneuver, overcorrected under conflicting orders, and exposed its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth struck milliseconds later, delayed by design to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The vessel's gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the rest of the ship collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 9,012 to 0 in under 5 seconds. 2. Imperial admirals shouted for a withdrawal corridor, but the geometry no longer permitted one. Human ships occupied the vectors they needed, holding position with calm precision. The third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space as its gunners tried to force an opening. A human cruiser answered with missiles carrying limited-yield nuclear charges, detonated not on impact, but at calculated standoff distances. The blasts were shaped, directional, tuned to crush sensor arrays and fracture hull integrity without vaporizing the ship outright. The command vessel went dark, drifting, systems dead but structure mostly intact. Human boarding transponders lit briefly, then went quiet again as the fleet held fire. We count before we fire. The line appeared on an Imperial auxiliary channel, flagged as a human doctrinal artifact. Origin unknown. Analysts barely noticed. Too much was failing at once. Imperial escorts attempted to screen remaining leadership ships, but the screen dissolved under kinetic pressure. Railgun fire did not saturate, it selected. Each shot removed a ship that mattered. Human gunners ignored targets that posed no immediate command or coordination function, letting lesser vessels live long enough to understand what was happening. At 1,800 kilometers, a cluster of Imperial cruisers tried to ram a human destroyer, desperate to trade mass for disruption. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.3 G, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Human sensors logged the impact as environmental hazard neutralization. No shots were fired. The battle clock ticked past 27 minutes. Imperial command coherence fell below 40%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses. Human losses remained at 0 destroyed hulls, 3 damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition expenditure updated in clean columns, 42 railgun rounds. Fired, 19 confirmed kills, 3 command vessels erased, 1 disabled for capture. The human battleship transmitted a status update, unencrypted. Primary objectives achieved, it read. Secondary in progress. Imperial resistance collapsed, unevenly after that. Some captains fought on, firing until their weapons overheated or their hulls failed. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes in every frequency they could access. Human ships acknowledged each signal automatically, marking surrendered vessels in green and excluding them from targeting solutions. At 34 minutes, the firing stopped, not because the Empire was gone, but because the math was finished. The remaining Imperial fleet floated in disordered clusters, leaderless, weapons cooling, damage reports, cascading faster than they could be read. Human ships held position, railguns silent, missiles cold. Boarding craft remained docked. The battle space settled into an uneasy quiet, punctuated only by drifting debris and the slow tumble of once untouchable flagships. Across the void, the HFY Empire learned the difference between firepower and accounting. The guns stayed silent by order, not exhaustion. In 34 minutes and 11 seconds, every human firing solution cleared simultaneously. Rail capacitors bled charge into sinks. Missile bays sealed. Across the shattered volume of space, Imperial crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission propagated outward from the human battleship, broad spectrum, unencrypted, riding civilian relays and military channels alike until it spilled beyond the system and into the wider network. The image was simple. The same human officer from first contact, framed identically, posture unchanged. No triumph marked their expression, no threat colored their voice. "This engagement is paused," they said. "Compliance fire has ceased." Imperial officers braced for terms of annihilation. None came. "We are broadcasting under interstellar law," the officer continued. "This message is addressed to all Imperial forces present, to your client states, and to any polity monitoring. This channel." Data panes unfolded beside the speaker, stark and readable. Definitions, statutes, thresholds. First, the practice of chattel slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel or installation engaged in the transport, processing, or ownership of sentient beings will be treated as a criminal enterprise. Across the Imperial fleet, internal alarms triggered as registry codes lit up red. Cargo manifests auto-flagged. Labor holds that had never been questioned suddenly appeared, on tactical overlays as liabilities. Second, the officer said, surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard distress and surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. Prisoners will not be harmed. We do not kill prisoners. The phrase repeated across channels, clipped and final, human targeting systems reinforced it in practice. Green markers spread across the tactical display as more Imperial ships powered down, some hesitantly, some with visible relief. Human fire control excluded them without exception. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word landed harder than any weapon. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets. An Imperial legal attaché attempted to interrupt, citing sovereignty and ancient accords. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, the officer replied calmly. Accords that permit it are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the image, crisp and unavoidable. Estimated enslaved populations liberated, 4.2 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 312. Command personnel detained pending trial, 184. Time frame for humanitarian transfer operations, 72 hours. Human ships began to move again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled numbers, medics visible through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones swarmed crippled Imperial hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human frigate altered course to avoid debris that might endanger a powerless cruiser, adjusting thrust by fractions of a degree to shield it. The officer concluded without flourish. You mistook restraint for weakness, they said. This is restraint. The transmission ended. In the quiet that followed, the Empire confronted a new reality. The battle had not ended, because humanity was finished, but because it had decided the killing was no longer necessary. And that decision, more than the wreckage drifting outside their hulls, made it clear the rules had changed. The revelation did not come from the humans. It emerged from the coalition observers who had been watching in silence, their sensor arrays, tuned wide, their political instincts sharpened by survival among empires. As the law broadcast echoed outward, coalition analysts began cross-referencing what they had just witnessed with archives that predated the Galactic Empire's rise. The patterns refused to stay contained. Human fleet movements were not reactive. They were anticipatory. A coalition tactical mathematician highlighted the acceleration profiles from the opening minutes of the engagement and overlaid them with ancient navigation data pulled from forgotten probe networks. The vectors matched corridors that had been mapped, abandoned, and remapped again over centuries. Human ships had not arrived in response to the Imperial incursion. They had already been there. 67 hulls distributed across 2.4 million kilometers was not a scramble. It was a lattice. They were waiting, the analyst said, and no one contradicted them. Coalition long-range sensors confirmed it. Beneath the noise floor, masked by civilian traffic and background radiation, human logistics nodes lit up like ghosts. Fuel depots embedded in cometary bodies. Ammunition caches buried in dead moons, maintenance docks disguised as survey platforms. Carbon dating on the oldest installations returned numbers that forced recalibration. 214 years. Some older. Preparation was not recent. The phrase circulated quietly through coalition channels, never transmitted toward the Imperial fleet. This knowledge was not for the defeated. It was for those who might choose sides. Human doctrine files, cracked from partial leaks and academic exchanges, long dismissed as theoretical, suddenly aligned with reality. The emphasis on kinetic weapons was not nostalgia, it was supply logic. Slugs could be fabricated anywhere, Armor plates could be repaired without exotic fields. Crews could be trained under constant stress, conditioned for sustained acceleration that coalition physiology could not survive. The humans had optimized for wars that lasted decades, not engagements measured in minutes. A coalition historian pulled a record from a century earlier. A minor border skirmish involving an unaligned system that vanished from imperial logs within a generation. At the time, the disappearance had been attributed to piracy. Now the censor. Signatures looked familiar. Too familiar. They have been enforcing this quietly, someone said, for a long time. The implications settled heavily. Humanity had not been hiding, it had been curating, allowing the Empire to expand until it crossed lines that had already been drawn. Waiting until proof was undeniable, until the moral ledger could be shown to the galaxy in clean numbers and recorded evidence. The law broadcast was not improvised. It was a template. Coalition diplomats ran probability trees and found no branch where humanity lost this conflict without rewriting. Physics. Even escalation scenarios terminated the same way. Not in mutual annihilation, but in controlled dismantling. Human fleets were positioned not just for this system, but for the next 6 choke points the Empire would logically fall back to, the Dashi. Realization triggered a quiet cascade of encrypted messages as neutral states reconsidered treaties signed under fear rather than consent. In the Imperial command wreckage, survivors struggled to understand how defeat had arrived so completely. In coalition space, the question was different. If humanity had been ready for centuries, then this battle was not the beginning of a war. It was the unveiling of policy. And policies, once revealed, tended to spread. Neutralization began without announcement. Human fire control reclassified the remaining Imperial vessels into 3 categories: hostile, surrendered, and undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was absolute. Green-marked ships were ignored even when they drifted across firing lanes. Red-marked ones were not warned again. Missile hatches opened across the human lattice. This time, there was no arithmetic restraint. Waves launched in disciplined silence, hundreds of signatures blooming and fading as guidance systems shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed, dividing and recombining, filling volumes of space Imperial doctrine had never treated as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses engaged reflexively and failed methodically. Interceptors chased decoys while real warheads slid through blind arcs created by earlier collisions and panicked maneuvering. At 6,000 kilometers, the first Imperial cruiser died with HFY, engines firing, torn apart by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. At 5,400, another lost power and rolled helplessly, its crew transmitting surrender codes seconds too late to cancel inbound fire already committed by logic gates that did not bargain. Human commanders noted the loss and adjusted nothing. Sashikim, cascade spread. Imperial captains watched their tactical displays bleed red and made choices in isolation, cut off from command authority that no longer existed. Some powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender on every channel. Human systems acknowledged them within milliseconds, their hulls flipping from red to green as missiles peeled away mid-course, retargeting without hesitation. Others hesitated, hoping to survive unnoticed. They did not. Boarding operations followed behind the missile waves, not as punishment, but as cleanup. Human cutters approached disabled ships at controlled relative velocities, grappling points locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. Resistance was rare. When it appeared, it was brief. Human teams did not clear decks with explosives. They sealed bulkheads, vented compartments, waited. Hunger and gravity did the rest. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed across human channels as a constant reminder. It was obeyed even when green-marked ships drifted into optimal firing solutions against still hostile targets. Human gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve principle. The choice slowed the neutralization by minutes. No one argued. At 18 minutes into the second phase, An Imperial carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a desperate bid to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was precise and impersonal. Point defense grids engaged, not to annihilate, but to corral. Kill zones shaped the flow of fighters into narrow cones where non-lethal electromagnetic pulses fried guidance systems. Hundreds of craft tumbled powerless, pilots alive, instruments dead, recovery beacons activated. Automatically, surrender cascade. The phrase appeared on coalition monitoring boards as a phenomenon, not a tactic. Once a critical mass of Imperial ships powered down, the rest followed. Crews watched neighboring hulls survive surrender and concluded the lesson faster than any broadcast could teach it. At 41 minutes, surrendered ships outnumbered hostile, once 3-1, at 52, 5-1. The last organized resistance came from a cluster of heavy cruisers that attempted to form a defensive ring around a crippled logistics tender. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotionally driven rather than tactically sound. Missile fire softened the ring. Railguns punched precise holes through power cores, and the tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants. Throughout it all, the human battleship held central position, its presence anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition counts updated in clean columns, missiles expended 312, railgun rounds 19 additional, nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. At 71 minutes, the final hostile vessel powered down. The battle space did not erupt in cheers or declarations. It simply went quiet. Hundreds of Imperial hulls drifted in ordered clusters, marked green, their weapons, cold, their crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions. Boarding tallies stabilized. Prisoners secured, 3.8 million, injured, treated, 412,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust to avoid damaging debris that might strike their hull and felt something unfamiliar settle in their chest. Not relief, not fear, understanding. The Empire's fleet had not been destroyed. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, decision by decision, until fighting no longer made sense. Human command logged the phase complete and shifted focus to humanitarian transfer and legal processing. The war, as an act of violence, was over. What remained was administration, and that the humans approached with the same calm precision they had brought to battle. Mercy arrived on schedule. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured Imperial crew were triaged without comment, their species tags flashing briefly before disappearing into the same priority schema. Painkillers flowed, splints locked, bleeding stopped. The process was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent to uniforms. No reprisals. The directive propagated with the same authority as a fire command. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and handed over without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal system already spun up and waiting. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in calm, neutral tones. Prisoner counts stabilized at 3.8 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human traffic control advisories. Relief convoys jumped in from pre-cleared vectors, bearing insignia of worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the pattern. Neighboring systems were not waiting for invitations. They were defecting. One by one, declarations arrived. Suspension of imperial tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the same statutes broadcast minutes earlier. Political gravity shifted not with speeches, but with filings. The Empire's authority bled away through paperwork faster than it ever had through force. We choose this law. The line appeared in multiple declarations, identical phrasing traced back to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption. The humans did not comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity. Enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked to sensor logs and testimony collected in real time. Command personnel, flagged earlier, 184 individuals, were separated and transferred under guard that did not tighten when they struggled and did not loosen when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. An imperial governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for political realignment. The response was a single sentence delivered by a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. In the detention habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no one had been spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults, shouted in panic. The lessons settled unevenly, but permanently. At 96 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stood aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The human battleship remained on station, scarred, armor patched in clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force applied, compliance achieved, mercy sustained. In distant systems, leaders weighed the cost of defiance against the evidence, drifting through every relay. The choice was no longer abstract. Humanity had not conquered territory. It had offered an order and shown, with meticulous restraint, what happened when that order was refused. The quiet came too cleanly. Debris fields stabilized into predictable orbits. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated through secure channels with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if violence had been a brief interruption rather than a defining event. Human sensors did not relax. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the heliopause. Their baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 112 hours post-engagement, one of those arrays returned a result that failed initial classification. The signature was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe. A pressure in space-time that suggested movement without conventional drives. Analysts reran the data. The anomaly held. The source lay beyond the quiet rim, at a distance measured in tens of thousands of astronomical units, approaching on a vector that ignored established jump corridors. Its mass estimate fluctuated, wildly, as if the object did not agree with being measured. Emission profiles matched fragments of forbidden research buried in pre-imperial archives, records of civilizations erased so completely their names survived only as warnings. An exterminator signature. Human command convened without ceremony. No alarms sounded across the fleet. No broadcasts interrupted relief operations. The information was compartmentalized, routed to planning cells that had existed long before first contact with the Empire. Timelines populated, contingency headers unlocked. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition. Observer, cleared under emergency protocols, asked a single question over a secure link. Is this connected to what just happened?
The human reply was measured. It is adjacent, they said. Not causal. Meaning this threat would have come regardless. Meaning the Empire had never been the final problem. The human battleship adjusted station by a fraction of a degree, aligning its long-range sensors with the approaching anomaly. Around it, other human ships mirrored the motion without instruction, geometry settling into a configuration older than the Empire's oldest charts. Preparations began quietly. Ammunition tallies updated. Training rotations shifted. Messages were sent to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond the rim, something ancient moved closer, indifferent to law, mercy, or surrender. Humanity watched it approach with the same calm it had shown an empire, and started doing the math again.